Czechoslovakia was established after the end of the First World War as one of the successor states of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. With a well-developed industrial base, particularly in vehicle and arms production, the new state quickly made ambitious plans to modernize its military. Among these priorities were the acquisition of tanks and tracked artillery tractors, which were to be produced domestically. Considering that the early tank and tracked tractor designs had some flaws, especially regarding mobility, it was decided to pursue the promising new technology of wheel-cum-track vehicles. A design for such a system was bought from German engineer Joseph Vollmer in 1923, marking the proper start of development of the first Czechoslovak tracked artillery tractor, which would eventually lead into the tank project based upon the same chassis. This tank would be named Kolohousenka. Since gaining independence, Czechoslovak military authorities closely followed foreign developments in tracked artillery tractors. While these vehicles offered superior cross-country performance compared to the wheeled ones, they were not without flaws. To begin with, they were more expensive than conventional wheeled towing vehicles and were also slower, making them less suitable for long road marches. In addition, their metal tracks caused damage to paved roads and were prone to wear and tear, increasing the overall logistical burden. Eventually, two main solutions to these problems emerged during the 1920s. One of them was developed by the American inventor and tank designer Walter Christie. His concept used a fully tracked chassis with removable tracks. On roads, the vehicle could operate on its wheels alone, allowing for higher speeds and reduced wear. When better cross-country performance was required, the tracks could be reinstalled, restoring full off-road capability. The second, more complex solution was the so-called wheel-cum-track design. This concept combined a four-wheeled chassis with a tracked running gear, aiming to bring together the best qualities of each: high road speed and reduced wear from wheeled vehicles, along with the superior off-road mobility of tracks. While promising in theory, the design proved to be overly complicated in practice, which ultimately limited its adoption. Unfortunately, for the pioneers in the Czechoslovak army, this drawback was not yet widely known. In their search for a tracked tractor vehicle, they were approached in 1923 by the German company Hanomag, which offered its newly developed RR50 wheel-cum-track vehicle. This machine was designed by the German engineer and automobile designer Joseph Vollmer. During the First World War, he had been involved in the development of components for the German tank program. After the war, Vollmer focused on civil engineering projects, particularly the design of towing tractors, where he achieved considerable success. Production licenses for these tractors were sold to various manufacturers, both in Germany and abroad. One of these companies was the Hanover-based Hanomag. In 1922, the company began production of two of Vollmer's designs: a light tractor powered by a 25 horsepower engine and a heavier tractor with a 50 horsepower engine, designated WD-25 and WD-50. Based on the WD-50, Vollmer developed a wheel-cum-track system known as the RR50, with RR standing for Räder Raupen, or wheels tracks. It was one of the earliest examples of this type of technology. The tractor was equipped with a front steering axle and a rear drive axle with double wheels. The wheels were suspended by leaf springs. To change from wheeled to track drive, arch-shaped wooden wedges were used. First, the axle was unlocked and the wheels were driven onto the wedges, which lifted the wheels and axle upward. Once fully elevated, the axle was locked again. The conversion could be performed by two people in about 5 minutes. Changing from tracks to wheels was carried out in the same way. However, in this case, the tracks had to drive up the ramps, lifting the vehicle sufficiently for the axles to be lowered again. The vehicles lacked a proper superstructure. The crew sat in the open while the engine was protected only by a simple sheet metal box. The vehicle weighed 6,800 kilograms and could reach a maximum speed of 21 kilometers an hour on wheels and 14 kilometers an hour on tracks. The Czechoslovak Ministry of Defense showed interest in the design from the outset and ultimately purchased a production license. Under the agreement, 2 prototypes were to be built domestically, with certain components imported from Germany. The designation RR50 was transcribed into Czech as KH50. The letters KH stood for Kolohousenka, a combination of the Czech words kolo, wheel, and housenka, caterpillar track. The overall assembly and production of the main components were to be carried out by Czech KD, Skoda and Tatra, while the engines were purchased in Germany. The 2 prototypes were completed by the end of 1924. The first driving and technical tests were conducted in January 1925, and in March they were officially handed over to the Automotive Artillery Department. There, the vehicles underwent extensive field trials, during which they were required to tow large-caliber artillery pieces over long distances. During these trials, the tractors often broke down due to the relative crudeness of the design. As a result, the testing process was prolonged and could only be completed in 1926. Given the rather poor performance of the KH50, the Czechoslovak Ministry of Defence decided not to adopt it. However, the ministry's approval to sell the design abroad soon paid off when the USSR placed an order for 2 tractors equipped with a stronger engine, known as the KH60. These were produced and completed in 1927, though it's unknown whether or not they were actually sent. With this new development, the Czechoslovak Ministry of Defence decided to give the project another chance, and the existing KH50 vehicles were modified to the KH60 standard. Despite the change in the engine, the original designation was retained. One vehicle was completed in January 1929 and began a series of field trials during the same month. The overall results were considered positive and far superior to those of the initial design. Parallel with the development of the KH50, the Czechoslovak army showed great interest in finding a suitable tank design to add to its inventory. The French Renault FT was considered the best candidate, and between 1922 and 1924, 7 such tanks were acquired. These were mainly used for testing, evaluation and occasional appearances in parades. However, the Czechoslovak army did not want to rely on foreign designs and instead aimed to develop a fully domestic one. To speed up development and make use of an existing design, the Czechoslovak army chose the KH60 chassis as the basis for their new tank. The project was officially approved in 1928 and the first prototype was completed later that same year. As the vehicle was intended primarily for testing, its superstructure was largely a mock-up, constructed from thin steel plates. Much of the planned equipment had not yet been installed. To compensate for the reduced weight, steel and lead ballast were added to simulate the mass of the intended armour and missing onboard equipment. After testing was completed, the superstructure was removed and stored at the Czech KD, where it was registered under the name Mock-up KH50, despite being based on the improved KH60. Today, however, this vehicle is best known as the Kolohousenka tank. The design of the armoured superstructure appears to be older and may already have been proposed by Joseph Vollmer when he offered his patents in 1923. The metal body was of riveted construction, with the exception of the 2 headlights, which were welded onto the hull. The frontal layout and the turret were reminiscent of the Renault FT design. The driver sat at the front and had access to a large hatch that could be opened upward, while 2 smaller hatches below it could be slid open to the sides. The turret's front roof sloped upward, and a large round-shaped cupola was positioned on top. On either side of the superstructure, beneath the turret, entry hatches were installed. The engine could be reached through hatches located above the rear wheels on both sides of the superstructure. Interestingly, the tank was equipped with a device that overpressurized the crew compartment, protecting the crew from potential gas attacks. The first prototype was armed with a 37mm or 1.45-inch gun, probably the Skoda D27 infantry gun. However, guns produced by Bofors and Vickers were also considered. In January 1929, the Kolohousenka prototype was present at Milovice. A report from February by the Military Technical Institute, requested by the Ministry of Defence, revealed that the prototype had been tested along the Praga MT and that the Kolohousenka exceeded the previously established requirements. It was recommended that testing with the Kolohousenka continue and that the vehicle be used during the autumn manoeuvres of 1929. If these trials proved successful, a platoon of 5 tanks could be purchased for use during the autumn exercises of 1931. The original armament requirement of a 75mm gun and a machine gun was considered unnecessary, as the tanks were not expected to operate independently. Instead, a mix of machine gun-armed tanks and gun-armed tanks was deemed sufficient. The testing of the Kolohousenka continued until November 1929. During that same year, a new armoured body was produced, designed by the 3rd Department of the Military Technical Institute. On 16th of December 1929, the Vickers gun was mounted and then removed from the tank and relocated to the Instruction Battalion in Milovice. On the 17th, the tank was transported to the Czechoslovakia factory, where it was equipped with the new armoured body. After the refit was complete, the tank remained at the plant until May 1930. During this time, it was tested in cooperation with the Military Technical Institute. On 21st of May, it was returned to Milovice. After further refinements of the design, the last order for a modified armoured body was placed on the 16th of July 1930 by the Ministry. Up to that point, the Kolohousenka had officially remained in the hands of the Automotive Artillery Regiment. However, as its role evolved, it was formally transferred on 11th of October 1930 to the Assault Vehicle Regiment based in Milovice, where it was assigned to the 2nd Armoured Car Company. In the spring of 1931, the Kolohousenka and a Renault FT were ordered to undergo comparative trials with the new Carden-Loyd Mark VI tankettes. These tests took place on the 25th of March 1931, after which the Kolohousenka was placed in storage. Some administrative changes occurred in December 1932, when the tank received the new registration 13.362, and in September 1933 when it was reassigned to the auxiliary company. Since it had not been used in a long time, it was reassigned to the School of Assault Vehicles shortly after, on 5th of October 1933. It remained with the school until the end of 1935, when its armour was removed and stored, while the chassis was re-registered as a school aid. In September 1937, the school moved from Milovice to Vyškov and took the KH-60 with them. There, it was found by the invading German troops when they occupied part of Czechoslovakia on 15th of March 1939. Interest in the Kolohousenka had already begun to fade in 1929, particularly after new Carden-Loyd tankettes were evaluated in Britain and 3 were ordered, arriving in the spring of 1930. An extensive programme was subsequently initiated with Czechoslovak, and 4 additional vehicles were produced under licence. An improved design, designated PI, was eventually adopted into service as the Tančík VZ33, or Tankette Model 1933. By focusing on this new vehicle, the Ministry of Defence effectively ended the Kolohousenka project, bringing nearly 7 years of development to a close. Even so, the effort was far from wasted. The programme provided valuable experience for everyone involved, the manufacturers, the military and government authorities alike. Lessons learned during this period helped shape future work, both in vehicle design and in the development of a Czechoslovak armoured doctrine. The decision to discontinue the Kolohousenka project did not mean that interest in the concept had completely disappeared. In 1929, the companies involved, Tatra, Czechoslovak and Škoda, were instructed to develop a new Wheel-cum-track tank. Czechoslovak declined to participate as it was already committed to the Carden-Loyd tankette programme. Tatra proceeded with its own design designated T3, but it was plagued by technical issues and showed little promise. Škoda's effort proved more successful. By 1931, it presented a new design under the designation SKU. However, during the production of 2 prototypes ordered in 1933, the design revealed numerous problems. As a result, in 1934 it was decided to abandon the wheel-cum-track concept altogether. The vehicle was subsequently redesigned as a heavy breakthrough tank, and development continued under the new designation ESH-3. This concludes our video on the Czechoslovakian Kolohousenka wheel-cum-track experimental tank. What do you think of this unusual design choice? Did the wheel-cum-track concept have any real merit if it had been further developed? Or was it ultimately a dead-end design? Share your opinions in the comments section below. If you haven't done so already, we invite you to subscribe to stay updated on future content. If you'd like to contribute further, consider supporting us on Patreon or PayPal. As always, we would like to especially thank our medium and heavy tank Patreon supporters: Dan Fitzpatrick, Dave Shuford, Owen M, R Rob and Sopwith21. Your generous contributions help fund our research, illustrations and video production. Until next time, keep us in your sights.